The black maid was accused of theft moments before the Mafia boss showed the real culprit cowering behind a door. Sarah Williams had just finished clearing a table in the upscale restaurant when she was stopped by the manager. The air in the dining room felt heavy, as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the storm to pass. Sarah's palms were sweaty, the silverware in her hands trembling as the manager's words cut through the tension. "I know you took it," he spat, glaring at her with suspicion. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, her mind racing. She had no idea what he was talking about. "What are you accusing me of?" she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. The manager, a tall man with cold eyes, sneered at her. "Don't play dumb, Sarah. The wallet is gone, and you were the only one near that table." Sarah felt a rush of panic, her mind struggling to process the accusation. She had been serving drinks just moments before, and she hadn't even seen anyone drop anything. "I didn't take it," Sarah insisted, her voice barely above a whisper. The manager didn't listen. "I'm giving you one chance to admit it. Otherwise, I'll have to call the police," he threatened, his tone mocking. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to remain calm. She knew she was innocent, but in a place like this, where wealth and power ruled, who would believe a maid over a wealthy guest? The room seemed to close in on her as she stood there, trying to fight back the wave of humiliation and anger threatening to overwhelm her. Just as the manager was about to make the call, the door to the back room suddenly slammed open. A tall figure stepped into the room, his presence so commanding that it felt as though the entire restaurant froze. It was Vincent Romano, the Mafia boss who had just entered the restaurant for dinner. His sharp suit and cold eyes scanned the room with unsettling precision. Sarah didn't even need to look twice to recognize him. His reputation had preceded him. The room seemed to breathe again, but now all eyes were on him. The manager hesitated, clearly unsettled by Vincent's sudden arrival. Sarah stood frozen, unsure of what was happening, when Vincent's voice rang out. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of authority. The manager stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence under Vincent's intense gaze. Vincent took a step forward, his gaze never leaving Sarah. "I said, what's going on?" he repeated, his tone not one to be questioned. Sarah was stunned, but the manager quickly explained the situation. "She's accused of stealing a guest's wallet. We've searched her, but—" The manager trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Vincent's eyes narrowed as he glanced at Sarah, then at the manager. "Search her again. I'll be waiting outside," he said coldly, his voice laced with an undeniable threat. Before anyone could protest, he turned and walked out of the room, his bodyguards following him. Sarah was left standing there, still in shock. What just happened? Why had he spoken up for her? The tension in the air was thick, but Sarah couldn't afford to waste time thinking about it. She needed to clear her name. The manager reluctantly motioned for her to follow him to the back, and as she did, she could feel her heart racing in her chest. Was this really happening? Would Vincent help her or make the situation worse? All she could do now was hope, as the weight of the situation pressed down on her. Sarah followed the manager, her heart pounding in her chest. The back room of the restaurant was dimly lit, with a faint smell of cleaning supplies lingering in the air. She had worked in this restaurant for months, but now it felt like the walls were closing in on her. Her mind raced, replaying the moments before the accusation had been made. She had been serving drinks, nothing out of the ordinary. But now, her entire world was unraveling. The manager led her to a small office in the back, the door creaking as he opened it. Inside, there was a desk cluttered with papers and a single chair in front of it. Sarah hesitated for a moment before sitting down, her hands shaking in her lap. The manager stood by the door, watching her with cold eyes. She could feel his gaze like a weight on her shoulders. He didn't trust her, that much was clear. "Wait here," he said, his voice flat. Sarah nodded, but the words barely registered. Her mind was elsewhere, trying to make sense of everything. She had never stolen anything in her life. The idea of taking someone's wallet, especially in this place, felt absurd. But now, she was caught in a situation she couldn't control. She had always kept her head down, worked quietly, and never caused trouble. So why now? Why had they chosen her? The seconds ticked by like hours. She could hear the murmur of voices from the restaurant floor, but they felt miles away. She wasn't part of that world, and it seemed like that world was turning its back on her. Just as she started to feel the weight of hopelessness settle in, the door swung open, and there he was again. Vincent Romano. His presence filled the room, as commanding as ever. Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of relief at the sight of him. But this time, there was something different in his eyes. It wasn't just the cold, calculating gaze that everyone feared. This time, there was something softer, something that seemed to acknowledge her. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he walked over to the desk, his eyes scanning the room. The manager stood in the corner, clearly uneasy under Vincent's scrutiny. "What's going on?" Vincent's voice was calm, but there was a steel edge to it that made the manager flinch. "We've searched her," the manager said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She claims she didn't take it, but you haven't found anything," Vincent interrupted, turning to face the manager. "No," the manager's voice trembled slightly. Vincent's gaze shifted back to Sarah. There was something in his eyes now that made her feel seen, as though for the first time, someone believed her. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. "Sarah," Vincent said, his voice low and steady. "You didn't steal anything, did you?" She shook her head, her throat tight with emotion. "No, sir. I would never." Vincent nodded, and without another word, he turned to the manager. "I'll handle this," he said simply. The manager looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Vincent's tone stopped him. He swallowed hard and nodded before stepping back. Vincent's attention was now fully on Sarah. He didn't ask her to explain further. He didn't need to. He could see it in her eyes, the truth. "You're free to go," he said, his voice softer now, though still firm. "But you'll stay here, won't you? You'll finish your shift." Sarah's mind was reeling. She had expected an argument, a reprimand, maybe even a dismissal. But this was different. Vincent didn't just clear her name. He gave her back her dignity. He didn't need to say more, but somehow, his presence alone made her feel like she wasn't invisible anymore. Sarah stood up, still in disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. Vincent gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Just do your job. I'll take care of the rest," he said before walking out of the room, his bodyguards following him as always. Sarah stood there for a moment, the weight of what had just happened slowly sinking in. She wasn't sure what Vincent had seen in her, or why he had stepped in to help. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she mattered. She felt like she wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was someone. The sound of footsteps outside the door snapped her back to reality. She quickly wiped her eyes and composed herself, walking out of the office and back into the bustling restaurant. The chaos of the evening was still in full swing, but Sarah's mind was elsewhere, processing the unexpected turn of events. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain. She wouldn't let herself be dragged down by this. Not after what Vincent had done for her. Not after being seen for the first time in a long time. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. The restaurant's bustling pace seemed to have returned to normal, but in her mind, everything had shifted. She couldn't shake the feeling that Vincent's presence had changed something in her. Before that night, she had never felt like she truly mattered. She was just the maid, the invisible worker who was seen only when she was needed. But now, something had changed. Vincent had seen her. He had believed her. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah wasn't sure if she could go back to being just invisible. Her shift was quiet that evening, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few days. As she moved from table to table, cleaning, serving, and doing her job, she couldn't help but notice the way the guests looked at her now. They were no longer dismissive or indifferent. There was a subtle shift in the air. It was as though they saw her, truly saw her. As if the shadow of her past was no longer so easily overlooked. But the attention was not the only thing that weighed on her. What bothered her more was the unsettling feeling that Vincent was watching her. She had seen him just the day before, sitting at a table across the room with a couple of men. His eyes had met hers from across the room, and in that moment, she had felt the same magnetic pull she had experienced the first time they locked eyes. But this time, there was a flicker of something different in his gaze. It was almost as if he was waiting for something. Sarah could feel his presence, even from a distance. She couldn't help but wonder what he saw in her. Was it just an act of kindness, or was there something more to it? The thought made her heart race, and she quickly brushed it aside. She wasn't the type to entertain fantasies, especially not about someone like Vincent. He was a powerful man, a mafia boss. He didn't have time for someone like her. And yet, Every time their eyes met, she couldn't help but feel as though there was something deeper, something unspoken, between them. It was during the following week that Vincent made his move. She was wiping down the counter near the back door when she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Vincent standing there, his usual entourage nowhere in sight. It was just him. And in that moment, Sarah felt the weight of his presence more than ever. He didn't say anything at first. He simply stood there, his eyes scanning the room before finally landing on her. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and calm. "I've been thinking about what happened the other night." His words caught her off guard. She hadn't expected him to bring it up. "You didn't have to do anything," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just wanted to clear my name." Vincent gave a small nod, his gaze never leaving hers. "You didn't deserve to be treated that way. I've been watching you," he continued, his words unexpected but not unwelcome. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't expected him to admit it, but somehow, hearing it from him made her heart skip a beat. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's expression softened, though his demeanor remained as calm as ever. "Because I believe in fairness. And I believe in loyalty." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He wasn't just talking about the situation with the wallet. He was talking about something bigger, something she didn't fully understand. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but she was interrupted by a voice calling from the dining area. Vincent turned his head, his eyes narrowing as he listened. "I need to go," he said, his tone almost apologetic. "But I'll be back later. I expect you to still be here." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Sarah standing there, her mind racing. She was unsure what to make of the conversation. Was it just a passing gesture? Or was there more to it? She couldn't be sure. But one thing was for certain. Vincent had stirred something inside her. She couldn't deny it. And now, she couldn't stop wondering what came next. Over the next few days, Vincent's visits became more frequent. Sometimes he would just sit in the restaurant, watching her from across the room. Other times, he would approach her directly, speaking with her for a few minutes before disappearing again. Each interaction left her with more questions than answers. She tried to keep her distance, reminding herself that she was just a maid, and he was the Mafia boss. There was no reason for her to get caught up in whatever this was. But the more she tried to push him away, the more he seemed determined to get closer. She couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. It was as though he understood her in ways no one else ever had. The feeling made her uneasy, but also strangely comforted. One evening, as Sarah was finishing up her shift, she was about to leave when Vincent's voice called out to her. "Sarah." She turned to find him standing by the door, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. His gaze was intense, but there was something softer in his eyes this time. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. She had learned by now that when Vincent spoke, it was not a request, it was an order. She followed him into the small back office, where he motioned for her to sit. "There's something I want you to know," he began, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not just here because of what happened the other night. There's more to it. You're more than just a maid to me, Sarah." His words took her by surprise. She had expected him to talk about business, to give her some reason why he was suddenly so interested in her. But this was different. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. She wasn't sure what to say, and Vincent didn't wait for her to find the words. He stood up, walking toward the door. "I'll be seeing you soon," he said, his voice quiet but firm. And with that, he left, leaving Sarah to wonder what had just happened and what it meant for her future. The days that followed Vincent's unexpected conversation weighed heavily on Sarah. She couldn't stop thinking about the words he had said to her. "You're more than just a maid to me." What did that mean? Did it mean something? Or was it just another gesture, a simple acknowledgement of her presence? She couldn't be sure. The more she replayed the encounter in her mind, the more questions piled up, but the answers seemed so elusive. The restaurant had been busier than usual that week, with several VIP guests coming in for private events. It was the kind of crowd that made Sarah feel even more invisible than before. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that Vincent's eyes were always on her, even when he wasn't physically there. He was a shadow in the back of her mind, lingering on the edge of every thought. Despite her attempts to maintain the routine of her work, Sarah found herself distracted more often than not. She would catch herself looking toward the entrance, hoping for a glimpse of him, but he rarely came in unless there was a specific reason. She tried to focus on her tasks, cleaning, serving, staying out of the way, but it was harder than ever. And then, one evening, just as her shift was nearing its end, Vincent appeared again. His presence seemed to fill the room, and for a brief moment, the clattering of dishes and the hum of conversation faded into the background. He walked into the restaurant like he owned it, his usual aura of authority surrounding him. But there was something different about him today, something that made Sarah's heart race. He didn't head to the VIP section this time. Instead, he made his way directly to the back, where she was standing by the kitchen, wiping down counters. Sarah froze when she saw him approaching. She had no idea what to expect from him this time. But the way he walked toward her, with purpose, made her pulse quicken. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, commanding. She looked up at him, trying to keep her composure. "Yes, Mr. Romano." Her voice barely betrayed the nervousness she felt, but she could feel her stomach tighten. He didn't respond immediately. He just watched her for a moment, his dark eyes scanning her face as if he was trying to read her thoughts. Finally, he spoke again, his words surprising her. "I need you to come with me," he said. Sarah felt a jolt of shock, and her first instinct was to refuse. What could he possibly want with her? But before she could say anything, Vincent gave a small, reassuring nod. "It's not what you think," he added, his voice softer now. "Just come with me. I have something important to discuss." Sarah's mind raced. She was terrified, unsure of what was happening or what he wanted from her. But there was something in his voice, in the way he spoke to her, that made her follow him without question. They walked through the restaurant and out the back door, into the cool evening air. The contrast of the bustling restaurant behind her and the quiet streets ahead made Sarah feel even more out of place. She felt like she was walking into the unknown, unsure of what awaited her. Vincent led her down a narrow alley behind the restaurant, where a sleek black car was parked. A driver stood beside it, waiting for them. Sarah's anxiety spiked as they approached the vehicle. Was she being taken somewhere? She was about to speak up, but Vincent turned to her, his gaze steady. "Trust me," he said quietly. His voice held no trace of hesitation, and Sarah found herself nodding despite the knot in her stomach. She had no choice but to trust him now. As she climbed into the car, she couldn't help but wonder where they were going and why she was here. The car drove through the city, and Sarah tried to focus on the passing streets, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Vincent. She had never been in a situation like this before. She had always kept her distance from people, never allowing herself to get close. But Vincent was different. He had changed the way she saw herself and the world around her. They eventually arrived at a private estate on the outskirts of town. It was a grand, imposing building, surrounded by tall gates and security. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she looked out the window. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Vincent turned to her, a small smile on his lips. "This is my place," he said. "I need to talk to you. There's something important I want to discuss with you, away from all the noise of the restaurant." Sarah nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. She stepped out of the car and followed Vincent into the estate. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior, luxurious, elegant, and grand. It felt like stepping into another world, one far removed from the restaurant where she worked. They walked down a long hallway, the walls adorned with expensive artwork, before entering a private study at the end of the hall. Vincent motioned for her to sit, and she did so cautiously. As she settled into the plush chair, Vincent poured them both a drink, the soft clink of the glass breaking the silence. He handed her a drink, and she took it hesitantly. "Sarah," he began, his tone serious. "I know what you're thinking. You probably don't understand why I've brought you here, or why I've been watching you. But there's something you need to know." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. This was the moment when everything would finally make sense. "I'm listening," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've been watching you for a reason. You're not like the others. You have something different about you. Something worth protecting." His words took her by surprise. She had always seen herself as nothing more than a maid, someone invisible, someone who worked in the background. But hearing him say, this made her feel like something more. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Vincent gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You'll understand soon enough. But for now, I want you to know this. I'm not just protecting you because of what happened at the restaurant. I'm doing it because I believe in you, Sarah." His words settled over her like a warm blanket. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. The days following Vincent's declaration felt like a dream. Sarah couldn't quite wrap her mind around it. Every time she tried to think about what he had said, it all seemed too surreal. "I believe in you, Sarah." The words echoed in her mind, but what did they really mean? Why her? What had he seen in her that made him believe in her so strongly? She had always been the invisible one, the maid who worked in the shadows. But now, with Vincent's unexpected attention, everything felt different. She couldn't help but notice that the atmosphere around her seemed to change. There was a subtle shift in the way people looked at her, and though it wasn't a grand gesture, she could feel their eyes lingering a little longer than before. They weren't just glancing at her in passing. It was as if they were noticing her for the first time. It unsettled her, but she didn't dwell on it. She had other things to focus on now. Work had become a blur of routines, cleaning, serving, moving through the motions. But at the back of her mind, Vincent's words lingered. He had given her something she had never known she needed, belief. It made her feel seen, but it also scared her. She had spent so many years trying to remain invisible, to avoid being noticed, to blend into the background. Being in the spotlight, even in a small way, was a foreign concept to her. But despite the fear, a part of her felt excited. For the first time in her life, someone believed in her. And for the first time, someone powerful had seen something in her worth protecting. It wasn't just an idle gesture. It was a promise, one she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. The following week, Vincent appeared again. But this time, it was different. He wasn't just passing through. He came directly to her, just as she was finishing her shift. She was in the back of the restaurant, wiping down the counters, when she saw him approaching. His steps were purposeful, his posture as commanding as ever. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm and steady. She looked up, startled, and immediately felt the usual rush of anxiety in her chest. She wasn't sure what to expect from him this time. She had been waiting for him to give her some indication of what he wanted, but she had no idea what that might be. "Yes, Mr. Romano?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even, though it trembled slightly. Vincent studied her for a moment before speaking. "I need your help with something," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. "There's a situation that requires someone with your discretion. I trust you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She wasn't sure what to say. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I need someone who can work quietly, behind the scenes," he said, his tone low. "Someone who understands the importance of loyalty and trust. Someone like you." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. Loyalty, trust, words she hadn't heard in years. She wasn't sure what he was asking of her, but she could feel the weight of his words. "What exactly do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice a little steadier now. Vincent gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "I can't explain everything right now, but I'll need you to assist me with a delicate matter. It will require your discretion, and I trust you to handle it properly." The trust he kept placing in her. It felt surreal. Sarah had spent so long trying to avoid being noticed, trying to remain invisible. And now, here she was, standing in front of a mafia boss, being asked to help with something that she didn't even fully understand. But Vincent's presence, his confidence, made her feel like she could do this. Like she was capable. "I'll do it," she said, before she could second-guess herself. Vincent's eyes softened just slightly, and for the first time, she saw something beyond his usual cold demeanor. "Good," he said, his voice low but approving. "I knew I could count on you." After a moment, he turned to leave, but not before giving her one last look. "Meet me tomorrow at the estate," he said. "I'll explain more then. I'll have someone escort you." As he walked away, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The excitement came from the fact that someone powerful, had chosen her. He had given her an opportunity to prove herself, to show her worth. But the fear? The fear came from not knowing what she was walking into. She had no idea what kind of situation she was about to become involved in. But she knew one thing. There was no turning back now. The next day, Sarah found herself at Vincent's private estate. She had never been to this part of the city before, and as she walked through the gates, She couldn't help but feel out of place. The estate was impressive, grand, and imposing. The kind of place she could never have imagined herself in. She was met at the door by one of Vincent's men, who led her through the hallways to a private room. It was lavishly decorated, the kind of place you only saw in movies. Sarah tried not to let her discomfort show. She was here for a reason. Vincent was counting on her. She had to do her part. When she finally saw Vincent again, he was standing by a large window, looking out at the estate's grounds. His posture was relaxed, but there was an intensity to his gaze. "Sarah," he said, turning to face her. "I'm glad you came. There's something I need to show you." His voice was steady, but Sarah could see the seriousness in his eyes. This was no ordinary request. This was something far bigger. And as Vincent led her into the next room, Sarah knew that her life was about to change forever. Vincent led Sarah down a hallway lined with dark wood paneling, the soft light from the chandelier above casting long shadows on the walls. The grandeur of the estate was undeniable, but it was the tension in the air that made her uneasy. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but every step she took seemed to take her deeper into a world she hadn't fully understood yet. They reached a door at the end of the corridor, and Vincent opened it, stepping aside to allow Sarah to enter first. Inside, the room was vast, filled with antique furniture and large windows that overlooked the estate's manicured gardens. But it was the large table in the center of the room that drew her attention. Spread out before her were several documents, maps, and photographs, each one carefully laid out as if they were part of a larger plan. Vincent gestured for her to sit at the table. "This," he said, his voice calm but serious, "is what I need your help with." Sarah sat down, her mind racing. She had no idea what she was looking at. The photographs were of various people, some of whom she recognized from her brief interactions at the restaurant, others she didn't. The maps appeared to mark locations around the city, some familiar, some foreign. But it wasn't until she looked at the documents that she began to understand. They were contracts, agreements, legal jargon that seemed completely out of her depth. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice betraying the confusion she felt. Vincent stood beside the table, his eyes scanning the documents before meeting her gaze. "These are part of a larger operation," he explained, his tone steady. "There are people in this city who think they can cross me, take what's mine. These contracts and agreements? They're just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. And I need someone I can trust to help put it together." Sarah looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Why me? I don't know anything about this. I'm just a maid." Vincent's expression softened for a moment, and he placed a hand on the table, leaning toward her. "You're not just a maid, Sarah. You're someone who sees things. You understand loyalty. You know how to keep your word, and that's something I respect. I need someone like you for this." His words hit her like a wave, and for the first time, she realized that maybe she wasn't as invisible as she thought. Maybe she had something to offer after all. "So, what do you need me to do?" she asked, trying to steady her breath. Vincent stepped back, straightening up. "I need you to help me find the people behind these deals. The ones who think they can outsmart me. These contracts, these agreements, there's a pattern here. But I need someone to go through them carefully, someone who can see what others might miss." Sarah nodded slowly, still processing the gravity of the situation. "I don't know how I can help, but I'll do my best," she said, her voice a little more confident than she felt. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was appraising her. "I wouldn't have asked if I didn't think you could. You've already shown me that you can handle things with discretion." He paused, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer before he spoke again. "This is bigger than you think, Sarah. But you're not in this alone. I'll be here to guide you every step of the way." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. She wasn't sure what she was getting herself into, but she knew one thing for sure. Vincent was right. This wasn't just about the restaurant anymore. This was something much larger, and she was now a part of it. She had no idea where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was playing a role in something that mattered, something that would change her life forever. As Vincent began to explain the next steps, Sarah listened intently, her mind racing with possibilities. She was about to embark on a journey that would take her far from the world she had known, into the shadows where power, loyalty, and danger intertwined. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew that there was no turning back now, and somehow, she was okay with that. The following days were a whirlwind of activity as Sarah immersed herself in the task Vincent had given her. She had no idea what she was getting herself into, but she couldn't deny the excitement bubbling in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something bigger. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was involved in something far more complex, and it felt both thrilling and terrifying at the same time. Vincent's estate became her new office, a place where she pored over contracts and documents with a level of concentration she had never known. The papers were endless, and the jargon was like a foreign language to her. But she was determined. Every night, she stayed later than the others, digging through the files, trying to piece together the puzzle Vincent had asked her to solve. She could feel his presence lingering, even when he wasn't physically there. He'd pop in now and then, checking on her progress, offering guidance when needed, but he didn't rush her. He let her work at her own pace, trusting her instincts. It was the trust that unnerved her the most. She wasn't used to it. Sarah had spent most of her life trying to stay invisible, trying to avoid drawing attention to herself. But now, Vincent was giving her responsibility, asking for her judgment, and it made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. One evening, after a particularly long day of deciphering legalese, Vincent stopped by the study. He wasn't his usual self today. There was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He was quieter, more intense. "Sarah," he said, his voice lower than usual. She looked up from the papers, her eyes tired but determined. "I've been going through everything you've found," he continued, walking over to the table where she had been working. "You're doing well." Sarah couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. "Thank you," she said, though her voice was tinged with uncertainty. "But there's still so much I don't understand." Vincent nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I know," he said, "but you're getting there. The important thing is that you're seeing the connections. You're not just reading the documents. You're understanding what's behind them." Sarah absorbed his words, trying to let them sink in. She had always been the one to doubt herself, second-guessing her every move. But with Vincent's encouragement, something inside her shifted. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't just following orders. She was actively contributing. "You're right," she said, a newfound confidence beginning to blossom within her. "I see the patterns now. It's all about control. These contracts, these deals, they're not just business. They're about power." Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly, as though she had just uncovered something critical. "Exactly," he said, his voice steady. "It's about control. And whoever controls these deals controls everything." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The weight of what they were uncovering hit her all at once. They weren't just exposing corruption. They were about to change the balance of power in the city. "So what do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent looked at her for a moment, as though considering his next words carefully. "We gather all the information, then we act," he said simply. "We move when the time is right." The silence in the room was heavy with anticipation. Sarah had never been involved in something so monumental, so dangerous, and yet, she found herself drawn to it. She wanted to see this through, to be a part of whatever Vincent was planning. For the first time in her life, she felt like she wasn't just a bystander in her own story. She was making decisions, uncovering secrets, and shaping her own future. Vincent continued, his gaze still fixed on the documents. "You're more valuable than you realize, Sarah," he said, his tone softer now. "I know I've asked a lot of you, but you've proven yourself, and I don't take that lightly." His words meant more than she expected. Coming from Vincent, someone who had always seemed so untouchable, it was a rare moment of vulnerability. Sarah didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, the words feeling more natural than she ever imagined. Vincent's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, she saw something other than the Mafia boss persona he wore so effortlessly. "I know you will," he said quietly. "I trust you." Those words, those simple words, meant everything to Sarah. It wasn't just about the task at hand anymore. It was about the connection they had built. It was about trust, respect, and the unspoken bond between them. As the days passed, Sarah found herself more deeply involved in the operation. The more she learned, the more she realized just how far-reaching the corruption went. But with every new discovery, she also felt a growing sense of purpose. She wasn't just working for Vincent anymore. She was working with him. And whatever came next, she knew she was ready. The days turned into weeks, and Sarah found herself diving deeper into the world Vincent had introduced her to. The weight of the information she had uncovered felt like a heavy cloak, but the more she learned, the more she felt herself transforming. She wasn't just the maid in the back of the restaurant anymore. She was someone who was beginning to understand the complex world of power and control that Vincent navigated so effortlessly. The late nights spent at Vincent's estate became routine. Each evening, Sarah would sift through the papers, decoding what she could, finding patterns where there were none before. Vincent trusted her with more every day, more documents, more responsibility, more of his trust. It wasn't just about loyalty anymore. It was about partnership. As the days passed, Sarah realized just how intertwined her life had become with Vincent's. There was a part of her that still couldn't believe it. She, Sarah Williams, a maid, was now working side by side with one of the most powerful men in the city. And in some strange way, it felt like it had always been this way. But despite the growing bond between them, Sarah couldn't shake the sense of unease that lingered in the back of her mind. She was in deep. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. And as the stakes grew higher, so did the risks. One evening, as Vincent entered the study, Sarah looked up from the documents she was reading. Her eyes met his, and for the briefest moment, she saw something in his expression she couldn't quite place. It was almost as if he was searching her face for something, or maybe he was considering something she didn't yet understand. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking through the tension in the room. "We need to move faster. There's someone who's been working against us from the inside. Someone close to me." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Vincent took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've been gathering information. We've been too complacent, too trusting. The people we've been dealing with aren't what they seem." The weight of his words hit her like a cold gust of wind. She had known this was dangerous, but now it felt real. Too real. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent paused, then handed her a folder filled with more documents, more contracts, and a few photos. "I need you to look at these," he said. "We've already lost too much time." Sarah took the folder from him, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. The documents inside were even more complex than the ones she had been going through, and the faces in the photos sent a chill down her spine. "These are people close to you," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Some of them are my closest associates," Vincent replied, his tone flat. "But not all of them can be trusted." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the thought that Vincent was drawing her into something much bigger than herself. She wasn't just playing a role anymore. She was a part of something that could change everything. As she studied the documents, trying to make sense of them, she realized something. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth. It was about taking control of it. Vincent wasn't asking her to just be a bystander. He was asking her to help him shape the outcome. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she thought about what that meant. She was no longer just a maid in the background. She was involved in something that could tear apart the very fabric of the world she had known. But somehow, she didn't feel afraid. Instead, she felt something else, something she couldn't quite name. Power? Control? Or maybe it was just the thrill of knowing she was no longer invisible. "I'll do whatever it takes," Sarah said, her voice firm. Vincent gave her a small, approving nod. "I know you will," he said quietly. There was a brief moment of silence between them before he continued. "Once we expose the people who've been betraying me, we can move forward. But first, we need to be sure." Sarah looked at him, her mind racing. "And how do we do that?" she asked, already knowing what his answer would be. Vincent's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "We move carefully. We gather all the pieces and wait for the right moment to strike." The words sounded simple, but Sarah knew that nothing about this situation was simple. It was dangerous. It was complicated. And it was more than she ever could have imagined. But despite the risks, she felt a strange sense of purpose. Vincent had trusted her. And now, as she sat there, looking at the faces of people she had once considered allies, she knew that everything was about to change. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to walk down it. As Vincent turned to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at her. "Remember, Sarah," he said, his voice steady. "Trust is everything. And I trust you." His words hung in the air long after he left the room. Trust. She had never known trust like this. It was a weight and a gift, both at the same time. And now, as she sat in that grand study, surrounded by the weight of the secrets they were uncovering, she realized just how far she had come. From a maid in the shadows to someone who was trusted with the future of an empire. The realization was both humbling and empowering. She was no longer invisible. She was a player in a game much bigger than herself, and there was no turning back now. The tension in the room grew thicker as Sarah and Vincent pored over the documents spread out in front of them. The walls of the study, adorned with portraits of distant ancestors and shelves filled with rare books, seemed to close in as the reality of their situation became clearer. Sarah had never been more immersed in something so complex, so dangerous. The stakes were higher now, and she could feel the weight of Vincent's trust resting on her shoulders. As the days passed, she started seeing patterns in the documents, hidden agreements, veiled threats, and codes she had learned to decipher. It wasn't just about exposing the betrayal within his inner circle anymore. It was about uncovering the larger network of power that had been operating under Vincent's nose. Vincent's presence in the study was a constant, a reminder that she was no longer just an observer in her own life. She was a key player, a partner in a mission that could alter the balance of power in the city. Yet, despite the growing connection between them, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that things were escalating faster than she was prepared for. One evening, as Vincent walked into the room, Sarah looked up from the papers she was reviewing. The flickering candlelight cast shadows across his face, making his expression harder to read. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "I've just received word that they're making their move sooner than we expected." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Who are they?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vincent's eyes darkened as he stepped closer. "The ones behind the deals, the ones trying to take control. They're closer than we thought. We need to act now, or everything we've worked for could be lost." The gravity of his words sank into Sarah's chest like a stone. This was no longer just about uncovering secrets. It was about stopping something far more dangerous. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up on her. Vincent looked at her, his gaze intense. "I need you to continue what you've been doing, gather information, but also, I need you to be ready. We might have to confront them directly." The word confront echoed in her mind, and for the first time, she felt a pang of fear. Confrontation wasn't something she had ever been comfortable with. She was a servant, a background figure, someone who avoided conflict at all costs. But now, in this moment, there was no turning back. She had already chosen her side. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. Vincent nodded, a rare flicker of approval in his eyes. "I knew you would be." Over the next few days, Vincent and Sarah worked tirelessly, connecting the dots between the various players involved. The more they uncovered, the more Sarah realized just how deep the corruption went. It wasn't just about control, it was about manipulation, coercion, and the relentless pursuit of power. Sarah had spent so much of her life looking away, staying in the background, but now she couldn't ignore what was happening. She was a part of it, and she had to act. The final breakthrough came late one night. Sarah had been going through a set of documents when she found something that made her heart race. It was a list of names, codes, and transactions, nothing that stood out at first glance. But when she pieced it all together, the picture became clear. The people behind these deals weren't just operating in the shadows. They were infiltrating every layer of the city's power structure. "Vincent," Sarah said, her voice trembling with urgency. He looked over at her from where he stood, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" he asked. She pushed the papers toward him, her finger pointing to the key document. "This," she said. "This is it. This is the evidence we need. The names, they're all connected. They're not just trying to undermine you. They're trying to take control of everything." Vincent studied the documents in silence, his eyes scanning the pages with precision. After a long pause, he looked up at her. "You're right," he said quietly. "This is bigger than I thought." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and fear. She had done it. She had uncovered the truth. But the road ahead was still uncertain. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's gaze softened slightly, but his expression remained determined. "Now we prepare," he said. "We'll take action. But we have to move carefully. We can't risk exposing everything all at once. Not yet. Sarah nodded, her mind racing with the weight of the plan. As they worked together, Vincent's trust in her seemed to grow stronger. He wasn't just relying on her for information anymore. He was depending on her to be there when the time came to act. The realization was both empowering and terrifying. The next few days were filled with tension. Every time Sarah thought she could breathe, something new came to light. An unexpected move from one of their adversaries, a new piece of the puzzle they hadn't anticipated. But through it all, Sarah stood by Vincent's side, learning to navigate the dangerous waters they were now treading. And as the final pieces of the plan began to fall into place, she knew that the time to act was drawing near. The feeling in the pit of her stomach wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. She was ready. The tension in the air was palpable as Vincent and Sarah prepared to move forward with their plan. Days of meticulous planning, gathering information, and connecting dots had led them to this moment, the moment when action would finally take place. Sarah stood beside the table, her eyes scanning the documents before her. Every detail mattered now. Every decision would have far-reaching consequences. The stakes were higher than ever, and she felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Vincent was by her side, his presence both reassuring and intimidating. His eyes were sharp, constantly evaluating every move, every word. But beneath the cold exterior, Sarah sensed something different now, a mutual understanding, a quiet respect. She was no longer just the maid in the shadows. She was an active participant in this game of power, strategy, and trust. Are you ready? Vincent's voice cut through her thoughts. She turned to face him, meeting his gaze. I'm ready, she replied, her voice steady, though she could feel the flutter of nervousness deep inside. He nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. We move tonight. Everything depends on how we execute this. Sarah swallowed, her heart beating faster. Tonight, everything they had worked for would either fall into place or crumble. There was no turning back now. Vincent had already set the wheels in motion. He had used his influence, his network, and his power to prepare for this moment. But it was up to them to see it through. The plan was simple. At least, that's how Vincent made it sound. They would confront the individuals who had been plotting against him, the ones who had been working from the inside to undermine his empire. But that simplicity was deceptive. Sarah knew better. Nothing in this world was ever simple. The plan relied on secrecy, precision, and timing. They couldn't afford a single misstep. They had to act swiftly and decisively. As the sun began to set, the city around them grew darker, and the air seemed to hum with the anticipation of what was to come. Sarah's nerves were on edge as they made their way to the designated location, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was unassuming, tucked away from the main roads, and it was there that they would confront the traitors. Vincent's car cut through the streets, the engine humming steadily, but Sarah could feel the tension building with every passing minute. The closer they got, the heavier the silence between them became. Vincent didn't say much, but she could see the determination in his eyes, the steely resolve that had carried him through years of navigating this dangerous world. Sarah wasn't sure what she expected, but as they pulled up to the warehouse, she realized just how much was riding on this night. The car came to a stop, and Vincent turned to her, his gaze softening for a moment. Stay close, he said quietly. No matter what happens, stay close. Trust me. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. Together, they stepped out of the car and moved toward the entrance of the warehouse. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with the tension of what was about to unfold. As they entered, the warehouse was eerily silent. The faint sound of footsteps echoed through the large, empty space. Vincent led the way, his steps confident and sure. Sarah stayed close behind, trying to steady her breathing, trying to quell the rising anxiety in her chest. They reached the center of the warehouse, where a group of individuals was waiting. The moment they stepped into view, the room shifted. People turned, eyes narrowing as they recognized Vincent and Sarah. The air thickened with unspoken threats and hidden agendas. Vincent stood tall, his gaze sweeping over the group, assessing each person with cold precision. You've been playing a dangerous game, he said, his voice carrying through the room. And it's time to end it. The tension was so thick, Sarah could almost taste it. The faces before her were familiar. Some she had seen in passing, others she had worked with directly. But now, they were no longer allies. They were enemies. Vincent had made his intentions clear. There was no going back. The leader of the group stepped forward, a man Sarah recognized from the few meetings she had attended. His face was cold, calculating, with a hint of arrogance. "You think you can intimidate us, Vincent?" he sneered. "You're outnumbered. This is over." Vincent's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Is it?" he asked, his tone low, barely above a whisper. But there was no mistaking the threat in his voice. The man's smirk faltered for just a moment. "You've been working behind my back," Vincent continued. "Manipulating, lying, and scheming. And now it ends." As Vincent spoke, Sarah could see the change in the group. The confidence that had been there moments before was beginning to crack. They had underestimated him, and now they were realizing the cost of that mistake. The room seemed to hold its breath as Vincent's words hung in the air. "You thought you could take what's mine," Vincent said, his voice unwavering. "But you're wrong. This city, my business, everything I've built, isn't something you can steal. Not from me." The leader opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. The power in Vincent's voice was undeniable, and for a brief moment, the group hesitated. Sarah stood by his side, watching as the confrontation unfolded before her. She had never imagined she would be in the middle of something like this, but as she looked at Vincent, she realized that this was his world. A world of power, trust, and loyalty. And she was a part of it now. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was playing her part. Vincent's gaze remained steady, his presence filling the room. "This is your last chance," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "Leave now, or face the consequences." The group exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of Vincent's words sinking in. No one moved. No one spoke. And in that silence, Sarah realized that the moment of truth had come. The room was about to change forever. The silence in the warehouse grew thick as the group of people in front of Vincent and Sarah stood frozen, not knowing how to respond to his ultimatum. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment, the tension thick in the air, as she stood silently by Vincent's side, every muscle in her body tensed. This was the moment they had been building toward for weeks, and now that it was here, she could hardly believe it was happening. She glanced at Vincent, who remained as calm as ever, his dark eyes unwavering. He had been here before, facing down opposition, navigating dangerous waters. But for Sarah, this was uncharted territory. The man in front of them, the leader of the group, hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. His arrogance was still there, though it wavered slightly in the face of Vincent's presence. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure, but there was a noticeable crack in his confidence. "You think you can just waltz in here and tell us what to do?" The man sneered. "You're out of your league, Vincent. We've been planning this for months. You're nothing more than a stepping stone." Vincent didn't flinch. His gaze remained steady, focused, as if he had already anticipated this moment. "Stepping stone." Vincent's voice was calm, almost too calm. "You think you've been planning? You've been playing games with the wrong person. You think you can take control of what's mine without consequences." The man's bravado faltered, and Sarah could see it in his eyes. He hadn't expected Vincent to be this composed, this resolute. Vincent was not the type of man to be easily threatened. "You've been manipulating the system," Vincent continued, his voice cold and cutting through the tension. "But you're not as clever as you think. It ends here. Now." The group stood motionless, their eyes darting between each other, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. The leader, clearly rattled, shifted his stance, trying to regain control of the situation. "You don't get to make the rules anymore," he spat. "We've already taken what we need." Vincent's eyes narrowed, the intensity in his gaze increasing. "What you've taken is nothing compared to what you're about to lose," he said, his voice low, but his words carrying an undeniable weight. Sarah could feel the gravity of the moment, and for the first time since she had entered this world, she realized how much was on the line. Not just for Vincent, but for herself. The air around them seemed to crackle with tension as Vincent and the group stood at a standoff, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Then, without warning, the leader of the group pulled out a phone and quickly tapped a few buttons. "We've made arrangements," he said, his voice now tinged with desperation. "You're not going to get away with this." Vincent didn't move. He simply watched as the man's phone buzzed in his hand. "You think I'm scared of some phone call?" Vincent asked, his voice icy. I've dealt with worse than whatever threats you think you have. You're too late. The leader looked up from his phone, his face pale. The group had underestimated Vincent. They had assumed he was just another player in the game, someone who could be manipulated. But what they didn't realize was that Vincent wasn't just in the game. He owned it. Sarah watched as the tension shifted, the group's once confident demeanor crumbling in the face of Vincent's unshakable resolve. They had made a fatal mistake by thinking they could take him on. The leader looked around at his associates, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. This isn't over, he muttered, though there was no conviction in his voice. Vincent's gaze never left him. It is over, he said firmly. You've lost. The finality in Vincent's voice left no room for argument. The man stood there for a moment, a bitter smile playing at the edges of his lips. But it was clear he had no more cards to play. He turned on his heel and motioned for the others to follow. The group slowly retreated, each of them aware that their plan had failed. As the last of them left the warehouse, Vincent turned to Sarah. His expression softened, just slightly, but enough for her to catch the flicker of approval in his eyes. You did well, he said quietly, his voice steady, though there was a subtle warmth there. Sarah felt a rush of pride at his words. The weight of everything that had led up to this moment seemed to lift, just a little. She had made it through this challenge, this test of loyalty, trust, and courage, and she had proven herself. Thank you, she replied, her voice calm, though inside, she felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't known she was capable of. I'm just getting started, she added, more to herself than to him. Vincent's lips twitched into the smallest of smiles, a rare, almost imperceptible gesture. That's what I like to hear, he said, his tone approving. The two of them stood in the silence that followed, the tension in the room slowly dissipating. The mission had been a success, and the enemy had been dealt with. But there was still much to be done. Vincent turned toward the door, motioning for Sarah to follow. Let's get back to work, he said, his voice steady as ever. As they walked together toward the exit, Sarah couldn't help but feel a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't just following orders. She was an integral part of something much bigger, something that had the potential to change everything. And for the first time, she felt truly alive in this world of power and trust. There was no turning back now. As the weeks passed after the warehouse confrontation, the weight of their actions continued to settle heavily on Sarah's shoulders. She had stood by Vincent's side through the first major move in their plan, and she could feel the shift in the power dynamic. It was no longer just about protecting him. It was about them working together, two minds intertwined in this intricate dance of trust and loyalty. Vincent had given her more responsibility. He trusted her now, and with that trust came the pressure to deliver. Each day, Sarah dove deeper into the web of documents, contracts, and names Vincent had given her. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that the world she had stepped into was not only dangerous, but filled with webs of betrayal, lies, and ambition. Sarah wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was a player in this game, and she had to make sure every move was calculated. One afternoon, as Sarah walked into the study, she found Vincent standing near the large window, looking out over the city. The faint glow of the setting sun reflected off his sharp features, his expression unreadable. He didn't hear her approach, so she hesitated for a moment, watching him. It wasn't often she saw him like this, silent, reflective. It almost felt like a different side of him, a side she had never seen before. Finally, he turned and caught her gaze. Sarah, he said, his voice deep and steady as always. We've come a long way. She nodded, her heart suddenly racing at the weight of his words. Yes, we have. He walked over to the desk, pulling out a set of documents that had been buried under the pile of papers. There's more, he said, placing the documents in front of her. These are the next steps. Sarah looked at the papers. The names, the contracts, they all looked the same as the ones they had been working through for weeks. But there was something about the way Vincent handed them over that made her pulse quicken. What's this? She asked, feeling the anxiety rise in her chest. Vincent's gaze met hers, and there was something more in his eyes now, determination, perhaps a hint of resolve. It's time to move against them. We've been gathering intel, but now we need to act. We need to expose them before they can do any more damage. Sarah swallowed hard. She had known this moment would come, but it was different when it was right in front of her. The game was changing. You're sure about this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent didn't hesitate. I'm sure. He leaned in slightly, his tone quiet but firm. This is bigger than us. They've been planning this for too long. We have to be the ones to bring it all down. Sarah stared at the documents before her, the weight of the decision settling in her chest. They weren't just fighting for control anymore. They were fighting for survival. The stakes had never been higher. What do you need from me? She asked, her voice steady, though she could feel the flutter of uncertainty inside her. Vincent's expression softened just slightly. I need you to help me. We need to expose the people who have been working against us, but we need to do it carefully. The world they've built is fragile, and the wrong move could destroy everything. Sarah nodded, her resolve firming. I'm ready, she said, her voice strong despite the unease she felt. Vincent's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, as if measuring her response. Then he nodded. I know you are. The next few days were a blur of activity. They had set their plan into motion, and every piece had to fall into place perfectly. Sarah worked tirelessly, tracking down every lead, going through every document, making sure everything was in order. There was no room for error. Every move had to be executed with precision. As Vincent had said, the wrong move could destroy everything. The day of the operation arrived, and Sarah felt her heart racing in her chest. They were about to expose the traitors, to turn the tables in a game that had been stacked against them. She stood in the back of the room, watching as Vincent orchestrated every move with the calm and calculated precision that had made him the man he was. As the plan unfolded, Sarah could see the changes in the people around them. The allies who had once stood by Vincent's side now watched him with uncertainty, their loyalty tested in ways they hadn't anticipated. They were about to learn what it meant to cross Vincent Romano. When the final piece of the plan fell into place, Sarah could feel the weight of the moment. She was standing at the precipice of something much larger than herself. There was no turning back now. As Vincent turned to her, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, pride, perhaps, or something deeper. You did well, he said quietly. His words, though simple, meant everything to her. She had come so far, from the shadows of the restaurant to standing by his side in this moment of power. And though she didn't fully understand the scope of what they had accomplished, she knew that it was just the beginning. She wasn't just a player in this game anymore. She was in control of her own fate. And she wasn't going to stop now. The days that followed the operation were filled with a mixture of uncertainty and anticipation. Vincent and Sarah had accomplished what they set out to do, but the city around them felt different now. There was a sense of unease in the air, a feeling that things were shifting, that the balance of power was slowly but surely changing. Sarah spent most of her time at the estate, going over the final details of the operation, making sure everything was accounted for. She had learned so much in the past few weeks, things she never could have imagined learning before. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was part of something much bigger, something that stretched beyond the walls of the estate and the confines of the life she once knew. The weight of her new role sat heavily on her shoulders, but she couldn't deny the thrill that came with it. She had become a trusted confidant, someone Vincent relied on. As Vincent's empire grew, so did Sarah's involvement. She was no longer just following his orders. She was making decisions, taking actions, and helping shape the future of everything they had worked for. But with that power came responsibility, and it wasn't lost on Sarah that the people around them were watching, waiting to see what would come next. One evening, as she sat in the study, reviewing the final reports, Vincent entered the room. He looked as composed as ever, but there was a certain energy to him tonight, something different. Sarah, he said, his voice steady as always. I need to talk to you. Sarah looked up from the papers she was reading, her heart skipping a beat. The calm in his voice only made the tension in the room more palpable. What's going on? She asked, setting the papers down. Vincent walked toward her, his expression unreadable. We've dealt with the traitors, he said, his voice low. But there's still work to be done. The city is changing, and I need you to be ready. The next move will be the most critical one yet. Sarah's pulse quickened. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. Vincent's gaze softened slightly, and for a moment, she saw a glimpse of something beyond the cold, calculating persona he had built over the years. I need you to stay with me. We're going to expand, but we need to do it carefully. This next step could either secure everything we've built or tear it all down. I trust you, Sarah. You're ready for this." His words, spoken with such sincerity, sent a wave of both pride and fear through Sarah. She had proven herself to him. She had earned his trust. And now, she had a responsibility she couldn't ignore. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice firm. Vincent nodded, the briefest hint of approval in his eyes. "I know you won't." The next few days were a blur of meetings, strategies, and planning. Vincent and Sarah worked tirelessly, finalizing the details of their next move. The city was theirs for the taking, but they couldn't afford any mistakes. Every decision had to be calculated. Every move had to be precise. The risks were greater now, but the rewards were even higher. As Sarah sat in the meeting room, listening to Vincent and his associates discuss the future, she couldn't help but think about how far she had come. Just a few months ago, she had been a maid in a restaurant, trying to make ends meet. Now, she was at the heart of a powerful empire, trusted by the very man who controlled it all. But with this power came danger, and Sarah knew that the game they were playing was far from over. Vincent leaned over the table, his voice steady and commanding as he addressed the room. "We move forward with our plan. No mistakes. No hesitation. We've worked too hard to let anything slip through the cracks." His gaze swept over the room, and Sarah could feel the weight of his words. She wasn't just a part of the team anymore. She was an integral part of the operation, and the stakes had never been higher. The next phase of their plan was set into motion. Vincent's network expanded, pulling in more territory, more influence, and more power. It was a delicate balance, but Vincent was a master at navigating it. He moved like a chess player, always thinking several moves ahead. As the days passed, Sarah's role continued to grow. She was no longer just handling the documents and reports. She was making decisions, taking action, and even negotiating with key players in Vincent's empire. She had become a trusted advisor, and she could see the impact of her work in every decision they made. The city around them was changing, and Sarah was no longer just an observer. She was a part of it. And as the final pieces of their plan fell into place, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had proven herself. She had earned her place by Vincent's side. But the road ahead was still uncertain. The game they were playing was far from over. And Sarah knew that there would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. And as Vincent stood beside her, his presence a steady reminder of everything they had built together, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together.